And good evening. Welcome to a very special live edition of States of America here on USA Today in New York. I'm Ralphie Aversa. 1 year ago today, COVID-19 shut down the world. And it would obviously be an understatement to say that so much for Americans has changed since then, including the president. And tonight, President Joe Biden will give his first primetime address to the country, of course, on the heels of a $1.9 trillion relief package that was signed into law earlier today. To talk about that and to get a preview of this primetime address from the president, we welcome in USA Today, White House and Congress, and editor Anna Ashbrenner. Anna, thank you so much for the time. Anna, let's start first with this primetime address tonight from President Biden. What can we expect?
So we had a bit of news that's broken just recently. The president is expected to direct all states tonight to make all adults eligible for their vaccines by May 1st. So really, he's going to tell states, you're going to be getting vaccines. We've just passed this bill that's going to give money for distribution, for vaccine production, and he wants to get all adults eligible to be vaccinated by May 1st. Now, this comes on the heels of him announcing recently that the United States should have enough vaccine for all adults by the end of May, which is significantly sooner than he had previously thought. And all of this sort of leads up to what we expect him to talk about, the hope that if everyone stays the course, gets vaccinated when they're eligible, that we would be able to gather with family and friends for the 4th of July.
So a directive coming this evening from President Biden in his first primetime address, as Anna just told us. This $1.9 trillion bill, how, if at all, does it relate to this directive from the president?
So, yeah, there's money in the bill to fund both distribution and production of this vaccine. We, found out recently that Merck is going to be helping Johnson & Johnson produce their vaccine. Getting Johnson & Johnson on board with their single-dose vaccine was obviously a huge boost to this effort to get more adults vaccinated. So there is money in the COVID relief bill to fund some of those efforts. And I think that this is really the president saying, we're putting the tools in your hands and we want you to start using them, once we can really ramp up this vaccination effort.
Okay, so with the bill, with the directive, what's to come next?
So this was obviously one of the president's campaign promises. This is something, he really campaigned on, I am the president to handle this challenge, which, as you said, is really almost unprecedented. So this is a big win. Passing this legislation for the president is a big win. We're expecting him in the coming weeks to get back out in the country with the First Lady, with Vice President Harris and her husband, and sort of do not a victory lap, but an explanation to the country to tell them what's in this bill, how it benefits them, and then he's going to be looking for another legislative win. We expect him to now look to potentially infrastructure, to immigration, and to start working on really what his next priority in Congress is going to be.
But we don't expect him to address any of that tonight, right? That's just now in these we're in day 51, of course, of the Biden presidency. That's maybe in these next 49 days within the first 100?
Yeah, the president made a variety of promises to get done in the first 100 days. Some he was able to do via executive order. Rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement was a big one. So addressing some aspects of immigration is something he has talked about. This infrastructure package, I think, is an opportunity. They're looking at it as an opportunity to get some bipartisan support. But yeah, looking at these sort of next 100 days, I think the administration feels good about this legislation getting passed and is now looking for their next win.
USA Today White House and Congress editor Anna Ashbrenner. As always, we appreciate the info, especially, of course, with the breaking news. And we will speak with you later on, Anna. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
We'd like to take a moment now to really recognize what a difficult year this has been for so many. COVID-19 has taken over 530,000 lives here in the United States. And behind each one of those numbers is a person, and that person really leaves a ripple of loss and grief for a family. Here is one of those family stories.
Loving and merciful God, we come before you now with broken hearts. We bring our hearts to you, trusting, Lord, that you are calling Miss Vina home. This is not our will, God. This is not our wish for her to go at this time. We give you permission for your will to be done, knowing that she will be at peace, that you will be able to love her and care for her in ways that we could not. Lord God, would you fill her with your peace now? That peace might be the bridge from this life to the next. Let this not be a drawn-out process. Give her peace in her body, peace in her mind and her heart as well. And may you receive her spirit to live in eternity forever and ever.
¿Quieres tocarle la mano?
Sí.
La quiero mucho, Mom.
Hi guys, my name is Kevin. I'm one of the chaplains here.
Okay.
I'm going to turn the iPad around for you guys to see, okay? I'm sorry that you can't be with her in person, but I know you are in spirit. But we're here with her. We're going to love her and take care of her as if she was our own, okay?
His mom, Dad. His mom, Dad. He doesn't believe it's not her.
He doesn't recognize her.
No. Oh, God. God. This strength, Lord. Give me the strength to get through this. I ask you that you give me the strength. Give my father the strength. You send my mom on a peaceful journey, that you wait for her with open arms. ¿Yo no quiere estar aquí? No. He wants to go. He wants to go.
And you're going to stay?
I'm going to stay to 4:30. I'm still here with her. I don't know what you guys want me to tell her more than I already told her that we miss her and we love her. We always thought that coronavirus was going to hit my dad the hardest. My dad, who has survived 4 heart attacks, 4 surgeries, he survived this. And here's a woman who's healthy in her age. It's just not fair. I hear about it. I see it on the news. And it doesn't really hit you till it hits home. And it definitely hit home. It definitely hit home. And it struck like the core of our family. Because she is the rock. She's the one that kept us together, good and bad. Mom took care of all 8 of us. She never worked. She was always there for us. But that's a mother for you. That's my mom. She will not let anything hurt her son, her daughter, her husband.
Por favor, Mom. No te vayas. ¿Qué voy a hacer sin ti, Mom? Mom. No te vayas, Mom. No, por favor, no te vayas.
My sister gave her to this, to the rosary like. My sister said, put it on her, and it will be home. She'll be home safe. Just God, just take care of her, please. I ask you, Father, that you take care of her. I love you, Mom. We're gonna miss you. You'll be gone, but not forgotten. I love you. I love you. I love you, Mom. I love you, Mom. Thank you, ladies, for your help. Thank you, ladies, for your work. We appreciate it.
I watched that the first time that we published it on the USA Today Twitter, and I can tell you, watching it the second time around, it did not get any easier. I just want to thank Sandy Hooper, Harrison Hill, and Jasper Colt, three of my extraordinary colleagues who did a great job with that piece. And thank you as well to the Dominguez family for giving us access and time and space, such a vulnerable moment in their lives. And of course, our condolences as well. Well, we're trying to turn the corner here on COVID-19, a disease that, as you saw firsthand there, has taken so much from so many, not just in the States, but worldwide, with well over 2 million deaths now due to COVID-19. However, in part of turning that corner, vaccine availability plays a huge role. Where are we at as far as that? And where are we as far as COVID cases right now here in the States? To find out more, we welcome in USA Today health reporter Adriana Rodriguez. Adriana, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and thanks for joining us this evening. Let's start on the cases front. Where are we now in the States compared to this past year, specifically when we had some of those surges?
Yeah, so in the spring is when the pandemic started, right? And we had about 30,000 cases a day on average. This is based on CDC data of the 7-day average. So then we go into the summer surge, and we have about an average of 70,000 cases per day. We dip there, and then we go into the fall surge, right? And from there, it sort of morphed into the winter surge. So we went from like 100,000 cases, 200,000 cases, all the way to January, where we peaked at around 300,000 cases. I think that was on January 8th, right? And now we've come back down to about 50 to 60,000 cases a day. Obviously, it's more than in the spring when the pandemic first hit. So we're around summer surge numbers at the moment.
That January surge peak that you spoke of, that was basically the post-holiday peak that many were afraid of, correct?
Correct. And, that's why also the fall sort of morphed into the winter, right? Because the fall, we had our holiday, we had our Thanksgiving, and then it went into the longer holiday with Christmas and New Year's and whatnot.
All right, Adriana. So now as we try to turn the corner and these vaccines are distributed to Americans across the country, something that we've reported on quite a bit here at USA Today is these underserved communities who may have had a bit of hesitancy getting the vaccine. Of course, we saw here in New York, the first to receive the vaccine, Sandra Lindsay. No coincidence that she's a woman of color who works in the health field who received it. And she's, of course, received both doses. Now, though, that so much talk has been made of the vaccine and so many have been distributed, are we seeing less hesitancy from those underserved communities?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head when you said, this is sort of becoming more normalized now that more people are getting their vaccines, more people are seeing their friends get it, more people are seeing their family get it, and they're feeling better about it now. So a Pew Research Center poll found that Black Americans in particular, so in December, about 42% said they were getting the vaccine. That number is now about 61%. So that increased, and we're happy about that.
As I mentioned before, as we try to turn the corner, something that certainly we could all be happy about, it's happening differently throughout different states, as this entire pandemic has played out differently in different states. Here in New York, for example, we're going to be going to 50% indoor dining here in New York City on March 19th. Meanwhile, in Texas, though, they are lifting the mask mandate. What is the CDC saying about what's happening in Texas right now, Adriana?
Yeah, I mean, health officials and CDC in particular have been very vocal about it, right? They're not happy about it. They think that it is too early, and it is too early. We only have 10% of the population fully immunized at this point. There's still, like we said, around 65,000 cases a day. There's still about 10,000 deaths a week. that's not, low. So we still need to do our part to mask and social distance, and maybe have restrictions where, restaurants are only at half capacity, like in New York, because we're just not at that point yet where we can say we can open up fully.
That's at a policy standpoint, but I feel like every time, Adriana, you and I speak on States of America, we talk about what we all can be doing in our own homes and in our personal lives to manage this. Even though we're at the 1-year milestone of this, and even though there is a $1.9 trillion relief package that was signed into law earlier, we are still in this pandemic. So Adriana, what is the CDC saying, and what are some of these guidelines that we should still have in our lives moving forward?
So the guidelines for unvaccinated Americans have not changed, and they haven't changed for the past year, right? And like you said, every time that I come on this show, we keep repeating them. It's the masking, it's the social distancing, it's the avoiding travel, it's the, making sure that you're frequently hand washing. So the difference in guidelines now from what the CDC had released on Monday has to do with vaccinated Americans, specifically fully immunized Americans, which I want to specify is 2 weeks after your last dose, whether it's the second dose of Pfizer or Moderna, or that after 2 weeks after that 1 dose shot of Johnson & Johnson. And so these guidelines changed a bit. They said that, vaccinated Americans can hang out with other vaccinated Americans inside the home without mask and without social distancing. They also said that these unvaccinated individuals can hang out with, these vaccinated individuals can hang out with unvaccinated individuals inside the home without mask and without social distancing, only if those unvaccinated individuals are not at risk for severe COVID. So they're younger, or they don't have any underlying medical conditions.
And just to get to, because it's interesting that there is that caveat, but I guess the whole point is here, we're trying to make sure people don't get severely ill from COVID. That's what the CDC is trying, at least, right? That's the point here?
Right, because if you're not getting severely ill from COVID, you're not being hospitalized, you're not putting stress on those hospitals. And also you're not at risk for, death. We don't want more death. We're at 10,000 a week. We're at more than 500,000 for the entire country. That's what we want to avoid. And that ultimately is also what's keeping us from reopening.
Absolutely. USA Today health reporter Adriana Rodriguez. We always appreciate the info, Adriana. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, when we first started talking with Adriana a year ago, and as we moved through this pandemic, a number of new terms and phrases and our whole vocabulary, things changed, things were added, like social distancing. For me, I had never done any work inside or work outside. So an N95, a KN95, what's the difference between the two? Super spreader events, that became another term in our vocabulary. Sadly, there was yet another one added recently, she-cession, not recession, she-cession. What does it mean? How did it come about? And what are the implications for the country? We welcome in USA Today national business correspondent Sharice Jones, who has more right now. Sharice, appreciate the time. And I know when I say she-cession, maybe your mind goes to that commercial and She Said. This is not a funny matter. We're not making light of this here. This is something very serious that came about with this job market. So Sharice, let's start first with the term she-cession. What does it mean?
It's a term that gender equity experts came up with, basically to describe a downturn that's very unique. Usually when you have a recession, it's men who lose the bulk of the jobs. But with this particular downturn, it's women who've borne the brunt. More than half of the jobs that disappeared in the last year were occupied by women. And in December, we have this really shattering statistic, the snapshot of how devastating this is, when every single one of the 140,000 jobs that disappeared was filled by a woman. So basically, you've got a decade's worth of progress in terms of tenure and climbing the corporate ladder that was wiped out during this pandemic.
I just want to reinforce that number here because it brings about this term that I'm sure is catching the viewer's attention. 141,000 jobs, Sharice, correct?
That's right. Every single position that was lost, basically women actually lost 156,000 jobs, but because men gained 16,000, it came out to 140,000 that were poof, just gone. And all of those belong to women. And so, a group that had finally achieved some parity in terms of representation in the workforce, all of that was shattered within this 1 year.
What does that, you mentioned it's set things back about a decade. What exactly does that mean now?
It means an erosion of job skills. It means a loss of tenure. The pay gap was already incredibly wide between women and men, and for women of color, it was even worse. When you're out of the workforce, it gets harder to get back into it. Employers are not as enthusiastic about hiring you. When you need a job, you may not be in the position to lobby for the kind of pay that you really deserve. And so all of these gaps along racial and gender lines were solidified and maybe even widened, and it's going to possibly take even longer to try and bridge those gaps.
In addition to women, communities of color were certainly affected by these job numbers as well. What are the implications there?
Well, you know, like everything with this pandemic, you saw how systemic biases and inequities play out in every facet of American life. And so while people across the board were affected by the pandemic and women across the board, women of color really struggled more. Latina women tended to dominate the hospitality industry, for instance, in restaurants. Those sectors were really hard hit. They had to close to slow the spread of the virus. So they were laid off more than other groups of women. Black women left the workforce in higher numbers because many of them didn't have anyone to watch their children. Schools were closed, childcare centers were closed, maybe an older relative, it wasn't safe for them to be at home with the child because of the virus. And so many of them had to leave the workforce to take care of their kids. Immigrant women, again, dominated hospitality and restaurants. And so all of these groups that were already struggling were set back even further.
There are a number of reasons why every American citizen should be concerned about this. But let's talk about these two trends, Charisse, and its impact on the overall economy. What is that impact?
Well, you know, we're an economy that's built on consumption, right? 70% of the GDP is about people buying things. If you don't have money, if you don't have savings, if you don't have a steady paycheck, you can't go buy a car. You know, you're not going out and buying anything that isn't essential. But there's also a real ramification for individuals and families. You know, 41% of women are the sole or primary breadwinner in their families. And so when they are not working, they're draining their savings. You can't buy a home, or you might lose your home, and you lose all that equity that's necessary to pay for college tuition and medical bills and to seed a business. And so the consequences are devastating for the entire economy, but they're also really bad for individuals and their families and their neighborhoods and their communities.
Let's talk about the individuals just for a second here. As you've reported on this, Charisse, is there any particular story, whether it's in an area or an industry or a single person, any story that has moved you or affected you in a certain way?
You know, there's a woman that I recently interviewed who had been working in the hospitality industry, self-sufficient, independent, had gotten divorced, had moved away from family, and she lost her job. And she has now had to go to food pantries, borrow money from relatives to pay the rent. And she said to me, I am broken inside. You know, she finally got a job working in a package delivery company office, and she's got to be happy and smile and greet the customers. And she says, inside, I am shattered. You know, I am scared. I see homeless people on the street, and I think that could be me. And it's a story that I think touched so many people. I've had people that have written me that want to donate money to this particular woman, because I think that it really resonates with a lot of our fears that have been sparked by what's happened. I mean, we're worried about our health and we're worried about our financial health. And so she really kind of illuminated the struggles that so many Americans are having right now.
Is it difficult to maybe not necessarily cover, but I guess talk about and have a greater conversation about these struggles when, you know, it's especially over the past 12 months since this has started, you know, one of the narratives that has been out there is, oh, well, the stock market's doing okay, so the economy's okay. Is it more difficult to kind of, I guess, cut through that to talk about what's happening to everyday Americans that have struggled throughout this pandemic?
That's a great question, because it really has been a K-shaped economy right? I mean, some people are doing great. You know, they're able to work from home. They still have their jobs. They're saving money because they're not having to commute and pay all of those expenses. They're not paying for childcare because they're at home with their kids. And so, like we've seen, housing prices have soared. Home ownership rates have soared with people, you know, out there buying a house for the first time and buying furniture for that house. And so understanding what it's like for those other folks who could be them but aren't, who have been laid off or are having to go out and work in the middle of a pandemic in a grocery store, making low wages. I think that there is a real disconnect. You have these different, you know, the stock market does not represent the economy for a lot of people. 50% of people are not even in the stock market, but that's what you see in the media a great deal. So you're right. I mean, you really do have to kind of communicate and break through and let people know, I know you're feeling okay, but there are a lot of other folks who are struggling and we need to care about them because they're our neighbors. They might be our family members. You know, there are other Americans, and the economy is impacted by everyone. And when somebody is struggling, that can impact you at some point as well.
All right, Sharice, let's try to turn this forward a little bit. You mentioned the damage that has been done already with this quote unquote she-cession and the decade that has been lost, you know, especially with the progress to the pay gap. Now, as we see this package sign into law, as we see the vaccines rolled out, is there some light at the end of the tunnel? Are we turning some type of corner here financially or no?
I think that there's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel because this was an unusual downturn in the fact that it was a forced downturn, right? We had to close businesses in many cases to slow a virus. Now that, you know, we're opening up, the vaccines are out there, I think there's going to be a lot of pent up demand. So there are people that are going to want to travel. They're going to want to go to an actual mall or store and not just order online. So I think a lot of jobs, not all of them, but a lot are going to come back on the table. And so it will be easier for folks to recover from this recession than we've seen with previous downturns. I think some groups will continue to struggle as they always have. But I think that we also learned how to work differently during this downturn. I think the idea that people need flexibility is something that employers are going to be thinking about, and that's very positive, especially for working mothers. And so I think that we really are at that point where we can feel much more hopeful about the future of the economy and the future of people's personal finances and circumstances.
Is there one industry, Sharice, you think that will come back stronger than another or before another in any way?
I think, well, obviously schools, once they get reopened, a lot of women worked in schools and childcare centers. That's something that's being focused on a lot by the president in terms of raising their pay and getting those open. I do think that travel has a chance. I mean, that might take a little bit longer because people are trying to figure out, you know, who do you let in the country without a vaccine and that type of thing. But I think that's going to rebound. And I think folks are going to want to be together. And so movie theaters, malls, you know, all of those could also have a renaissance in the next several months.
You mentioned, obviously, mothers who are trying to work from home may have been able to do that successfully or not, may have been laid off as a result. They had to be at-home teachers as well, obviously, with so many children learning virtually. How do you anticipate companies perhaps providing more flexibility to those mothers in light of everything that's happened and things that will be happening as we move forward here?
I think that a lot of folks are going to continue to be able to work from home. If that's something they were able to do. You know, some folks obviously still had to go into their workplaces, but for those who were able to work remotely, I think that there will be more flexible schedules, for example, you know, like a couple of days a week, you go into the office, the rest of the week you're able to work in your house. So I think that that's something that's going to become a permanent part of the workplace. I think that employers are realizing that everything isn't urgent. Right? So, you know, really be very specific. You know, I need this right away. This I can wait. So if you've got to pick up your kid, if you need to take a break for your mental health, do that and then come back to that task. And so I think that people are rethinking, you know, how to be a good employer, how to retain the best talent, and how to adjust to people's lives so that you're not buckling under the strain of doing double duty at home and outside in the workplace.
USA Today national business correspondent, Sharice Jones. Sharice, thank you so much for all of the insight this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, as we've talked about, women, communities of color, and certainly a number of different people throughout this country have experienced loss or hardship in a number of different ways. And now, of course, President Biden signing into law this $1.9 trillion relief package, trying to offer some sense of hope to some of those Americans in a number of different ways, one including, of course, the 1,400 stimulus checks. This is, I'm sure, and especially judging by the traffic that we get to USA Today, something you're very interested in. When are you getting that check? Who is available? And as far as this package, what's going where, to who, how is it all happening? Let's bring in right now the man who knows many of those answers. He, of course, USA Today congressional reporter Nicholas Wu. Nicholas, good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start first with the package, the relief bill that President Biden signed into law earlier today. What is going where with this $1.9 trillion?
Well, it's a huge bill. And I mean, you mentioned the $1,400 checks. That's definitely something that a lot of people know about. But there's plenty in that bill, too, beyond the checks. I mean, for example, there's a huge expansion of the child tax credit up to $3,600 per child in most families. So this will have a huge effect on poverty across America. There's money in there for vaccine development and distribution. There's billions of dollars in funding for schools to reopen. So there's a whole lot in there, and we're only just going to start seeing the effects of it over the next few weeks.
Okay, so let's go real quick. I'm sure something that viewers are concerned about is those schools. Do you know what specifically is being done to address schools reopening?
Right. So there's a certain amount of funding that can be given as grants to schools in order for them to try to create better ventilation systems and really retrofit schools in a way that would make them COVID safe for children.
And then as far as, trying to help out small businesses, I guess what's in the package as far as that?
So there's billions of dollars in funding for aid, and for actually, unlike in previous packages, there's a specific amount of aid set aside for restaurants, which will be a huge help for plenty of places around the country that have had to close because of COVID or shift to an entirely carry-out format.
Absolutely. And of course, you mentioned it's interesting to hear you throw around the term billions. You have to remember that this is a $1.9 trillion package. So obviously there's a lot of money. And of course, as we mentioned, these $1,400 checks that are in there as well. What is the latest on those stimulus checks as far as who's eligible and when they will be receiving them? That's
for sure. So the White House press secretary said today that the first checks could actually start arriving in people's bank accounts by this weekend. So that's only if you have direct deposit on file with the IRS. And then for those who filed their taxes by paper, it could take a little bit longer to process all of that, especially given that this is right in the middle of tax season.
Let's go a little bit to the background of this bill, Nicholas, because it was not bipartisanly supported by any stretch of the imagination. What, I guess, was in this bill originally that didn't make it to what President Biden eventually signed on his desk earlier?
So one of the biggest Democratic and progressive priorities in this bill in the beginning was the increase in the federal minimum wage. Democrats really wanted to hike it to $15 an hour and saw this bill as one way to do that. That got dropped by the time it got to the Senate because Democrats were using very special rules in Congress to pass this bill. And under those rules, everything that has to be in the bill needs to have some sort of specific impact on the federal budget. The minimum wage, the Senate's parliamentarian rule, did not, so it got kicked out. There was also money in here that got cut out in the Senate. So, for example, the eligibility for stimulus checks changed in the Senate. They used in the House's version of the bill, they phased out at a slightly higher amount, but in the Senate version, the cutoff was set at $80,000. So, Democrats didn't get everything they wanted in the very beginning in this bill, but at the end of the day, they struck compromises with each other and managed to get it all the way through.
Yeah, we got to talk about that for a second, because as maybe you caught the fact that I said it was not bipartisanly supported. Okay, but yet Democrats still voted for this and pushed it through. Why did they even have to compromise in the first place? So How did this work? I mean, how weren't the Democrats here all on the same page, able to get whatever they initially wanted through? What happened here, Nicholas?
Well, if you talk to Democrats about it, they have a very big tent party, as they call it. There's conservative Democrats, there's progressive Democrats, urban, rural ones, and so on and so forth. But what we saw here was some of the conflict that splits among the party, especially when you have such slim majorities. There's only a handful of seats that they control the House by, and the Senate is technically split 50-50 among Democrats and Republicans, with Vice President Harris breaking ties. So this means that any one individual senator has a lot of power. And that is exactly what Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who's a conservative Democrat, did with this bill. He really wanted to restrict the unemployment insurance provisions in this bill. He thought that it could be a lower amount than it was, because otherwise it might disincentive people from going back to work. And also he wanted to change the duration of it. So for those who are taking advantage of the federal boost unemployment benefits in this bill, the compromise that got worked out was that it would be a $300 a week benefit instead of a $400 one as originally created, and it would run through the very beginning of September. But the things that progressives really wanted and got with the unemployment insurance was a tax avoidance. I'm sorry, not tax avoidance, a non-taxable provision on the unemployment. So for the first time ever, your first $10,200 of unemployment benefits are non-taxable.
And is that something that Manchin fought for or against? Because obviously he was a pivotal figure here.
Manchin fought to make the non-taxable part income restricted. So for households making under, I think it was $150,000, they were not eligible. Families earning more than $150,000 were not eligible for the making their unemployment non-taxable.
I don't know if it is a referendum on the legislative branch, on the Democratic Party. I'll let you kind of take that. But what does it say that, one person could hold all of this up with the party that has control, no less?
That's just kind of the way Congress works. I mean, the whole reason Democrats passed this bill in the kind of unorthodox way they did was because they weren't able to get Republican votes on board. And in the Senate, where any one member has a ton of power, that's only amplified by this procedural roadblock known as the filibuster, where you would have to get 10 Republicans on board to even get your bill to the floor in the very first place.
All right, so obviously we focused a lot on the Democrats who were able to eventually get this signed into law, but let's talk about the GOP for a second. Why did not a single Republican cross the line here?
It was kind of surprising that they didn't, but I mean, they held strong against this bill and lined up against it because from the Republicans' point of view, Democrats tried to put all these things into the bill that were not related to COVID. The child tax credit, the minimum wage increase, the money for things like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, things that Republicans didn't like and they thought would load up this bill. And also for moderate Republicans, the price tag of this thing, $1.9 trillion, was far too much for them. I mean, it's worth putting in perspective. Around this time last year, one of the very first COVID relief packages went through Congress. And how much was that? 8.3 billion with a B dollars. So, Congress has put out trillions and trillions of dollars over the past year. And for Republicans, that was already too much.
The fact that there was no bipartisan support, Nicholas, and especially, look, President Biden throughout his campaign and when he took office, he campaigned on his experience working across the aisle. And in this first major piece of legislation that he gets through, no Republican supported. Is this a sign of things to come?
It very well could be. But I mean, the legislative experience that Biden is able to draw from probably will help him in future battles. I mean, at the very beginning, stages of negotiation on this bill, he did sit down with Republican senators and he actually really enjoyed these conversations. There was one meeting that he held with a group of moderate Republican senators that was supposed to go for an hour. It went for like 2 hours, and I'm sure they could have kept talking through the night if they had the time to do it. So, there's still a possibility to build bridges here. Both parties talk about infrastructure as something that they could come to compromises on, and that will likely be one of the next keystones of the Biden agenda.
as far as this bill, though, because if you look at the polls, even though no Republicans support it, this bill seems to be popular amongst Americans. And of course, it's providing relief to said Americans, and in some cases, money to their checking account as well. So might there be some blowback here to Republicans that didn't support this bill after it could be, potentially so well received among Americans?
That's certainly something Democrats are hoping for. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi sent out a letter to all House Democrats this past week telling them to, in the next few weeks, start trying to hold events, sending mail, sending electronic mail to all of their constituents to tell them about this bill and what was good about it for them. Since Democrats are haunted by what happened after the housing crisis, and they passed a big relief package in 2009. But in Democrats' view, they didn't get nearly enough credit for it, and they got clobbered in the midterms the next year. So they're trying to avoid a repeat of that.
All right. So we mentioned, of course, for some people who are set up for direct deposit, they may receive that $1,400 stimulus check as early as this weekend, according to the White House press secretary. And of course, President Biden signing it into law earlier. He'll give his first primetime address coming up in give or take about 20 minutes or so. After these stimulus checks are distributed, at least the first round of them, what's next as far as this bill, Nicholas?
We'll start to see money from lots of different parts of this bill going out. One immediate benefit to families will be the child tax credit, which I mentioned earlier. So the legislation says that it could start being credited to families in July. And the interesting thing here is that normally the child tax credit is just a yearly deduction that you claim on your taxes. But with this, Congress has structured the law so that it could be sent out as a periodic and perhaps monthly payment to people. So divide whatever your final tax credit is by say 12 months, and that's even more money in people's pockets.
USA Today congressional reporter Nicholas Wu. Nicholas, as always, we appreciate the time, and we thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, as we mentioned at the top of this live edition of States of America, we are 51 days into the Biden presidency. As we look ahead to the next 49 of that first 100 and beyond, we bring back in USA Today White House and Congress editor Anna Ashbrenner. Anna, let's start, I guess, with the Biden administration's approach to this pandemic as it compares to the previous administrations. I guess, what are the big differences that have stuck out to you?
So I think one of the big differences we've seen since Biden took office in January is he has talked repeatedly about a sort of federal centralized government response to the pandemic. You see him taking phone calls with governors and sort of pushing forward what looks like a more federal response to this. President Trump, a little bit differently, had put in the federal framework, but relied a little bit more on states to sort of execute their visions for their states as they saw fit within that guidance. You've seen since Biden took office, he asked everyone to wear a mask for the first 100 days. He's now tonight asking states to make sure that all adults are eligible for the vaccine by May 1st. So a little bit more of a federal sort of centralized response, where I think, President Trump offered sort of a same federal offering, but gave money and sort of ideas to the states for them to execute as they saw fit.
Obviously that news broke at the top of the show, Anna, with you kind of alerting us that there would be this directive in the primetime address that's coming up here from President Biden. So let's just clean that up a little bit, though, because he's going to say May 1st, he wants the eligibility to open up. But obviously that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have the supply for all adults by May 1st, correct?
Right. So the president a few weeks back announced the expectation that the United States will have enough vaccines for all adults by the end of May. So obviously we're vaccinating a lot of people. We're trying to. So some of that will take time. But tonight, yes, he's directing states to open up vaccine eligibility. As I'm sure many of our viewers know, vaccine eligibility varies by state. It can vary sometimes by county. So this is really the president saying, by May 1st, let's get to a place where all adults are eligible for this vaccine.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you've kept in touch with friends and family across the country, it's fascinating to see different age groups in different locations and how this is being rolled out and handled, and of course that availability. But you mentioned the 100 million in the first 100 days. I mean, is that still something that's feasible here over these next 49?
I think so. The president has said he wants to get 100 million shots in arms within 100 days. That's not 100 million people vaccinated. That's 100 million shots administered. So it'll very likely be fewer than 100 million people. But we crossed 50 million people about 35 or so days after Biden took office. So if we maintain that pace, we will very likely cross 100 million shots administered well before that 100-day mark.
Anna, of course, earlier we were talking with congressional reporter Nicholas Wu about Republicans not supporting this at all. I'm curious tonight, with President Biden's first primetime address to the nation, are we expecting a formal response from the Republicans, or is this going to be something where Republicans simply open up their Twitter app and respond that way? What are we kind of expecting here?
Well, I don't expect it to be, similar to a State of the Union where there's sort of a formal on-camera, someone behind a podium giving the statement of response for Republicans. I'm sure you'll see statements from some leaders in Congress. We might hear from President Trump, but it's not the same. There won't be someone formally on camera rebutting Biden. And you're mentioning of no bipartisan support, I think, for this bill puts Republicans in a little bit of a sticky situation. Out in the country, we have seen polling that this bill is popular with Democrats, is popular with Republicans and independents. The majority in polls of all of those three sort of political groups have said that they support this bill. So you have Republicans trying to sort of find the things in this bill that they can point to and say, this is excessive. This is, this is the government run amok, and maybe just trying to not look at those things that are popular, like the checks.
You mentioned earlier, Anna, the difference in the Biden administration compared to the Trump administration, and the fact that, the Biden administration has obviously tried to have more of a federal hand in this as opposed to just leaving it up to the states. How have the states reacted to this over his first 51 days?
I think we've seen even, Republican governors have said that they have felt respected and supported. There are obviously some things that need to get smoothed out with just different systems going online with the new administration and sort of combining them with the infrastructure that was in place before. One of those things our reporting showed a couple weeks ago is just vaccine distribution specifically. So some states are getting vaccines directly to the states for then the states to hand out to their county health departments, and in other, they're also getting a federal allotment of vaccines that are going to maybe your Walgreens, your CVS, your local pharmacy. And so those are sort of two separate streams going on. And so I think part of this is really the administration trying to work with those governors to streamline some of that effort.
There has been some likening to FDR's New Deal with this $1.9 trillion relief bill. Is that fair? Will they have a similar impact?
I mean, I think it's significantly different in just that we didn't invent new programs for jobs, things like that. It is a chunk of change. It's almost $2 trillion. So I don't think we'll know that for a little bit of time. There has been some discussion, there's differing opinions among economists that this bill was too much. It's going to be too much of a shot of money into the economy. It's going to cause inflation down the line, which is just going to be worse for things. And then there's, economists on the other side who have said, really, there's no amount of money too big to be throwing at this problem because the country has been so disrupted and economies have been so disrupted over this past year.
Obamacare has been back in the headlines for some inequities that may have been exposed throughout all of this. Do we know if President Biden plans to address that at all?
I'm not sure. Obamacare, there was money in this coronavirus relief bill to offer up an expansion of Obamacare to, get more people hopefully covered by healthcare. I'm not sure we'll see that become a significant portion of the president's agenda. It just hasn't been something that we've heard recently that, is sort of top of mind. We're hearing more infrastructure and immigration specifically. The immigration bill is already on the Hill. It already has co-sponsors. So it's obviously something that the administration has talked about during the campaign about addressing, inequity in healthcare, particularly as we've seen coronavirus impact people of color much more severely than their white counterparts. So I'm sure it's part of their agenda, but I just don't think that it's the top part of their agenda right now.
Of course, we thank you for joining us here at USA Today, States of America, a special live edition as we ready for President Biden's first primetime address to the nation since winning the election last year. That address will be coming our way in a little over 5 minutes now. White House and Congress editor Anna Ashbrenner joining us here. I'm Ralph Villaversa. Anna, a lot, I guess, was made of the fact that President Biden has waited longer than his past 15 predecessors to personally hold a press briefing. He hasn't been exactly absent completely from the press. However, he has yet to hold one of these briefings that's typically held within the first, 20 to 35 days even of a presidency. Where can we expect, I guess, this to land? It certainly doesn't replace a press briefing, but does this quell any of his critics, maybe even especially on the conservative side, where they've kind of used this as a weapon against the president in an attack line?
I don't think it will quell that criticism if for no other reason than he's not taking questions tonight. This is an address, specifically to the country, a primetime address. And so he won't face any questions from the press after. You're right. He has not come before the press yet. Obviously, I await that. We want to see the president as much as possible. We want to have access to him and ask questions as much as we can. He has answered some questions. The nature of the job, there is press around for events, for signings, for swearing-ins, those kinds of things. So you'll get a shouted question every once in a while. But, obviously, from my position, I'd love to see the president in the briefing room every day if possible. I know that's the dream, but we're expecting that he will, I believe by the end of the month, Jen Psaki said that he will be in the briefing room talking to reporters and taking questions.
And of course, again, the president hasn't been completely absent, as you mentioned. There have been some high-profile interviews as well with Norah O'Donnell at CBS. He and Dr. Biden sitting down with people, and of course the town hall that CNN held with Anderson Cooper in Wisconsin. So he has been out, but as you mentioned, Anna, of course, it's not the same as a press briefing. Let's get back to Biden's first 100 days here. Obviously, this was a big part of it. There were a number of things that he was doing on day one, of course, as well. But besides this now, what we've discussed, what else can we expect from the second half?
So, yeah, like you said, this coronavirus stimulus bill or relief bill has really, I think they feel laid the groundwork for the rest of the agenda. Without getting this bill passed, it would have been really difficult to move on to other things because of how disruptive the pandemic has been. But there is still desire to see action on climate change. Rejoining the Paris Agreement is great for a lot of people. But I think climate change activists are looking for action there. Immigration activists are looking for bold action there. We're expecting the House in the next few weeks to pass some piecemeal pieces of immigration legislation that they have tried to move before. And there has been talk that potentially the president's immigration bill, which is separate from those bills, will get sort of broken up and passed piecemeal through Congress. It's not clear if that's going to happen yet, but I think that getting some tangible action done on immigration in these first 100 days is really important. But like you said, there were things that the president was able to do in those first 2 weeks that addressed some of those promises he made on the campaign trail, because they were simply executive orders that he was able to rescind from the previous administration. So there's been some work, and basically after those first 14 days of a flurry, I think, of executive orders, the focus has been on this coronavirus bill.
And again, we're expecting that first primetime address from President Biden a little after the top of the hour, 8 o'clock here in New York. I'm Ralphie Aversa with a special live edition of States of America on USA Today. And Ashbrenner, our White House and Congress editor, also joining me as well. So, of course, you talk about some of the executive orders that he has signed. Certainly, he campaigned on the fact that he wasn't going to necessarily legislate that way, that he would work across the aisle as well. With what you've talked about now, do you see some opportunities there for him to do just that?
When you look at things like infrastructure, I think it's a win-win for both parties. For the most part, you can get money back into your congressional district, specifically back into your state. You can put people to work. And I mean, when you think about the things that you are very likely upset with in your own community, I live in the Midwest. Potholes and bad roads. I mean, it's very much a win-win. So I do think that there is some hope that there will be some bipartisan support for an infrastructure package. But again, this is a very deeply divided Congress. Democrats, are split with Republicans 50-50. Vice President Harris has to be that deciding vote in the Senate. And you can't pass everything through budget reconciliation, which is this legislative maneuver that they used to pass the coronavirus stimulus bill. So infrastructure can pass through that little maneuver, which only requires a simple majority. But other things like immigration, a significant climate change package would have
and I'm going to wrap you up right there because President Biden is making his way to the podium. So we will go to his first primetime address as president right now here on USA Today.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Tonight, I'd like to talk to you about where we are as we mark 1 year since everything stopped because of this pandemic. A year ago, we were hit with a virus that was met with silence and spread unchecked. Denials for days, weeks, then months. That led to more deaths, more infections, more stress, and more loneliness. Photos and videos from 2019 feel like they were taken in another era. The last vacation, the last birthday with friends, the last holiday with extended family. While it was different for everyone, we all lost something. A collective suffering, a collective sacrifice. A year filled with the loss of life and the loss of living for all of us. But in the loss, we saw how much there was to gain in appreciation, respect, and gratitude. Finding light in the darkness is a very American thing to do. In fact, it may be the most American thing we do. And that's what we've done. We've seen frontline and essential workers risking their lives, sometimes losing them, to save and help others. Researchers and scientists racing for a vaccine. And so many of you, as Hemingway wrote, being strong in all the broken places. I know it's been hard. I truly know. As I've told you before, I carry a card in my pocket with the number of Americans who have died from COVID to date. It's on the back of my schedule. As of now, total deaths in America, 527,726. That's more deaths than in World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, and 9/11 combined. There were husbands, wives, sons and daughters, grandparents, friends, neighbors, young and old. They leave behind loved ones, unable to truly grieve or to heal, even to have a funeral. But I'm also thinking about everyone else who lost this past year to natural causes, by cruel fate of accident or other disease. They too died alone. They too leave behind loved ones who are hurting badly. You know, you've often heard me say before, I talk about the longest walk any parent can make is up a short flight of stairs to his child's bedroom to say, I'm sorry, I lost my job. can't be here anymore. Like my dad told me when he lost his job in Scranton. So many of you have had to make that same walk this past year. You lost your job. You closed your business. Facing eviction, homelessness, hunger, a loss of control, maybe worst of all, a loss of hope. Watching a generation of children who may be set back up to a year or more because they've not been in school because of their loss of learning. It's the details of life that matter the most. And we miss those details, the big details and the small moments. Weddings, birthdays, graduations, all the things that needed to happen, but didn't. The first date, the family reunions, the Sunday night rituals. It's all has exacted a terrible cost on the psyche of so many of us. For we are fundamentally a people who want to be with others, to talk, to laugh, to hug, to hold one another. But this virus has kept us apart. Grandparents haven't seen their children or grandchildren. Parents haven't seen their kids. Kids haven't seen their friends. The things we used to do that always filled us with joy have become things we couldn't do and broke our hearts. Too often, we've turned against one another. A mask, the easiest thing to do to save lives. Sometimes it divides us. States pitted against one another instead of working with each other. Vicious hate crimes against Asian Americans who've been attacked, harassed, blamed, and scapegoated. At this very moment, so many of them, our fellow Americans, they're on the front lines of this pandemic trying to save lives. And still, they're forced to live in fear for their lives just walking down streets in America. It's wrong, it's un-American, and it must stop. Look, we know what we need to do to beat this virus. Tell the truth. Follow the scientists and the science. Work together. Put trust and faith in our government to fulfill its most important function, which is protecting the American people. No function more important. We need to remember the government isn't some foreign force in a distant capital. No, it's us, all of us. We the people. For you and I, that America thrives when we give our hearts, when we turn our hands to common purpose. And right now, my friends, we're doing just that. And I have to say, as your president, I'm grateful to you. Last summer, I was in Philadelphia and I met a small business owner, a woman. I asked her, I said, what do you need most? I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, looking me in the eye, she said, I just want the truth. The truth. Just tell me the truth. Think of that. My fellow Americans, you're owed nothing less than the truth. And for all of you asking when things will get back to normal, here is the truth. The only way to get our lives back, to get our economy back on track, is to beat the virus. You've been hearing me say that for while I was running and the last 50 days I've been president. But this is one of the most complex operations we've ever undertaken as a nation in a long time. That's why I'm using every power I have as President of the United States to put us on a war footing to get the job done. Sounds like hyperbole, but I mean it, a war footing. And thank God we're making some real progress now. In my first full day in office, I outlined for you a comprehensive strategy to beat this pandemic. We've spent every day since attempting to carry it out. 2 months ago, this country didn't have nearly enough vaccine supply to vaccinate all or ever near all of the American public. But soon we will. we've been working with vaccine manufacturers, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, to manufacture and purchase hundreds of millions of doses of these 3 safe, effective vaccines. And now, at the direction and with the assistance of my administration, Johnson & Johnson is working together with a competitor, Merck, to speed up and increase the capacity to manufacture new Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is 1 shot. In fact, just yesterday, I announced, and I met with the CEOs of both companies, I announced our plan to buy an additional 100 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccines. These 2 companies, competitors, have come together for the good of the nation, and they should be applauded for it. It's truly a national effort, just like we saw during World War II. Now, because of all the work we've done, we'll have enough vaccine supply for all adults in America by the end of May. That's months ahead of schedule. And we're mobilizing thousands of vaccinators to put the vaccine in one's arm, calling active duty military, FEMA, retired doctors and nurses, administrators, and those to administer the shots. And we've been creating more places to get the shots. We've made it possible for you to get a vaccine at nearly any one of 10,000 pharmacies across the country, just like you get your flu shot. We're also working with governors and mayors in red states and blue states to set up and support nearly 600 federally supported vaccination centers that administers hundreds of thousands of shots per day. You can drive up to a stadium or a large parking lot, get your shot, never leave your car, and drive home in less than an hour. We've been sending vaccines to hundreds of community health centers all across America, located in underserved areas. And we've been deploying, and we will deploy more, mobile vehicles and pop-up clinics to meet you where you live so those who are least able to get the vaccine are able to get it. We continue to work on making at-home testing available. And we've been focused on serving people in the hardest hit communities of this pandemic: Black, Latino, Native American, and rural communities. So what does all this add up to? When I took office 50 days ago, only 8% of the Americans, after months, only 8% of those over the age of 65 had gotten their first vaccination. Today, that number is 65%. Just 14% of Americans over the age of 75 50 days ago had gotten their first shot. Today, that number is well over 70%. With new guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, that came out on Monday, it means simply this: millions and millions of grandparents who went months without being able to hug their grandkids can now do so. And the more people are fully vaccinated, the CD will continue to provide additional guidance on what you can do in the workplace, places of worship with your friends, as well as travel. When I came into office, you may recall, I set a goal that many of you said was that kind of way over the top. I said I intended to get 100 million shots in people's arms in my first 100 days in office. Tonight, I can say we're not only going to meet that goal, we're going to beat that goal, because we're actually on track to reach this goal of 100 million shots in arms on my 60th day in office. No other country in the world has done this. None. Now, I want to talk about the next steps we're thinking about. First, tonight, I'm announcing that I will direct all states, tribes, and territories to make all adults, people 18 and over, eligible to be vaccinated no later than May 1. Let me say that again. All adult Americans will be eligible to get a vaccine no later than May 1. That's much earlier than expected. Well, let me be clear. That doesn't mean everyone's going to have that shot immediately, but it means you'll be able to get in line beginning May 1 Every adult will be eligible to get their shot. And to do this, we're going to go from 1 million shots a day that I promised in December, before I was sworn in, to beating our current pace of 2 million shots a day, outpacing the rest of the world. Secondly, at the time when every adult is eligible in May, we will launch, with our partners, new tools to make it easier for you to find the vaccine and where to get the shot, including a new website that will help you first find the place to get vaccinated and the one nearest you. No more searching day and night for an appointment for you and your loved ones. Thirdly, with the passage of the American Rescue Plan, and I thank again the House and Senate for passing it, and my announcement last month of a plan to vaccinate teachers and school staff, including bus drivers, we can accelerate massive nationwide effort to reopen our schools safely and meet my goal that I stated at the same time, about 100 million shots, of opening a majority of K through 8 schools in my first 100 days in office. This is going to be the #1 priority of my new Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona. Fourth, in the coming weeks, we will issue further guidance on what you can and cannot do once fully vaccinated to lessen the confusion, to keep people safe, and encourage more people to get vaccinated. And finally, fifth, and maybe most importantly, I promise I will do everything in my power. I will not relent until we beat this virus. But I need you, the American people. I need you. I need every American to do their part. And that's not hyperbole. I need you. I need you to get vaccinated when it's your turn and when you can find an opportunity. And to help your family, your friends, your neighbors get vaccinated as well. Because here's the point. If we do all this, if we do our part, if we do this together, by July the 4th, there's a good chance you, your families and friends will be able to get together in your backyard or in your neighborhood and have a cookout or a barbecue and celebrate Independence Day. That doesn't mean large events with lots of people together, but it does mean small groups will be able to get together. After this long, hard year, that will make this Independence Day something truly special, where we not only mark our independence as a nation, but we begin to mark our independence from this virus. But to get there, we can't let our guard down. This fight is far from over. As I told the woman in Pennsylvania, I'll tell you the truth. July 4th with your loved ones is the goal. But a lot can happen. Conditions can change. The scientists have made clear that things may get worse again as new variants of the virus spread. We've got work to do to ensure that everyone has confidence in the safety and effectiveness of all 3 vaccines. So my message to you is this. Listen to Dr. Fauci, one of the most distinguished and trusted voices in the world. He's assured us the vaccines are safe. They underwent rigorous scientific review. I know they're safe. Vice President Harris and I know they're safe. That's why we got the vaccine publicly in front of cameras, so for the world to see, so you could see us do it. The First Lady and the Second Gentleman also got vaccinated. Talk to your family, friends, your neighbors, the people you know best who've gotten the vaccine. We need everyone to get vaccinated. We need everyone to keep washing their hands, stay socially distanced, and keep wearing the mask as recommended by the CDC. Because even if we devote every resource we have, beating this virus and getting back to normal depends on national unity. And national unity isn't just how politics and politicians vote in Washington, or what the loudest voices say on cable or online. Unity is what we do together as fellow Americans. Because if we don't stay vigilant and the conditions change, then we may have to reinstate restrictions to get back on track. And please, we don't want to do that again. We've made so much progress. This is not the time to let up. Just as we were emerging from a dark winter into a hopeful spring and summer is not the time to not stick with the rules. I'll close with this. We've lost so much over the last year. We've lost family and friends. We've lost businesses and dreams we spent years building. We've lost time with each other. And our children have lost so much time with their friends, time with their schools. No graduation ceremonies this spring. No graduations from college, high school, moving up ceremonies. You know, and there's something else we lost. We lost faith in whether our government and our democracy can deliver on really hard things for the American people. But as I stand here tonight, we're proving once again something I've said time and time again, to the probably tired of hearing me say it. I say it to foreign leaders and domestic alike. It's never, ever a good bet to bet against the American people. America is coming back. The development, manufacture, and distribution of vaccines in record time is a true miracle of science. It's one of the most extraordinary achievements any country has ever accomplished. And we also just saw the Perseverance rover land on Mars. Stunning images of our dreams that are now a reality. Another example of the extraordinary American ingenuity, commitment, and belief in science and one another. And today, I signed into law the American Rescue Plan, an historic piece of legislation that delivers immediate relief to millions of people, includes $1,400 in direct rescue checks, payments. That means a typical family of four earning about $110,000 will get checks for $5,600 deposited if they have direct deposit or in a check, a treasury check. It extends unemployment benefits. It helps small businesses. It lowers health care premiums for many. It provides food and nutrition, keeps families in their homes, and it will cut child poverty in this country in half, according to the experts. And it funds all the steps I've just described to beat the virus and create millions of jobs. In the coming weeks and months, I'll be traveling along with the First Lady, the Vice President, the Second Gentleman, members of my cabinet, to speak directly to you, to tell you the truth about how the American Rescue Plan meets the moment. And if it fails at any pace, I will acknowledge that it failed, but it will not. About how after long, dark years, one whole year, there is hope and light of better days ahead. If we all do our part, this country will be vaccinated soon. Our economy will be on the mend. Our kids will be back in school. And we'll have proven once again that this country can do anything, hard things, big things, important things. Over a year ago, no one could have imagined what we were about to go through. But now, we're coming through it. And it's a shared experience that binds us together as a nation. We are bound together by the loss and the pain of the days that have gone by. We're also bound together by the hope and the possibilities of the days in front of us. My fervent prayer for our country is that after all we've been through, we'll come together as one people, one nation, one America. I believe we can and we will. We're seizing this moment, and history, I believe, will record. We faced and overcame one of the toughest and darkest periods in this nation's history, darkest we've ever known. I promise you, we'll come out stronger with a renewed faith in ourselves, a renewed commitment to one another, to our communities, and to our country. This is the United States of America. And there's nothing, from the bottom of my heart, I believe this, there's nothing we can't do when we do it together. So God bless you all. And please, God, give solace to all those people who lost someone. And may God protect our troops. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I look forward to seeing you.